Chris, Dina, thanks for being on the show.
Oh, good morning. We're glad to be here.
It's great to be here. It's been a while. We've been working on this for a while. But
I know. And here we are.
Yeah.
You two have an incredible story of your not only your business, but your family and your life. We want to unpack some of that for our listener and our audience member for encouragement. You've been so gracious to be transparent in your journey. Of course, we spent a lot of time together in our leadership development mastermind group. You two have very different skill sets, and I think it's a great place to start. You know, when first of all, working together, husband and wife, a family, and a homeschooling family at that over the years, you've got a lot of moving parts. Somebody listening right now is like, okay, you have my attention. When did you two realize that in your business that you had to give up some control? Chris, this was more for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, we started out, if I can go back a little bit, when we got married, I was a photographer and just starting that business back in the late 90s. And of course, when you're a creative person and you're an entrepreneur, you feel like you have to do everything. And in the beginning, you do have to do everything. And while I loved the creative aspect, I honestly, photography was very good for my ego. People tell you how great you are, how awesome you are, and all this kind of stuff. But over the years, my photography business did fine, but I wasn't really a great business operator. That was a real weakness. And that became apparent pretty early on, wouldn't you say? Now, my wife has she's got a degree in accounting, right? So she's actually educated and she was all on board. She helped out every way she could. She always did the books for us, right? That became apparent that I was terrible at that. And so, but we kind of just labored through the process. The business grew, revenue was fine, but we were so many fires I was always putting out. And, there's a real aspect of entrepreneurship or business. I would say then I probably owned a job more than I was building a business, honestly. But revenue was fine. And
it was great for a while.
Yeah, it was great for several years.
Yeah.
But it became pretty clear that there's a lot of things that I'm just not very good at that are required. I read the book, The E-Myth, right? And the E-Myth was basically that you need a entrepreneur. And I think I had the entrepreneurial ideas. You have to be a technician. I was good at doing the work, but maybe the most important part of any business is the management. And that's what I totally suck at. And so we always talked about my wife doing more, but we were having babies, right? And then we began the homeschool journey. So we kind of labored through it. But when we shifted from that world into the business that we're building now together, we really set out to say, okay, how soon can I get out of the way of the business growing, right? And revenue being what it is and cash flow being tight, you can't just hire and outsource what you need. And as our kids got older anyway, my wife really stepped into taking more of a role, and that's where we are now. So there's things she does now that are off my plate. And then in a couple of years, we hope to be replacing ourselves too with people that are even better than we are at that. But yeah, management is not my strong suit and turns out to be the most important part.
So Dina, as a supportive spouse, how do you navigate? Let me step it back. Did you know that? Did you? How long have you two been married?
Almost 30 years.
Almost 30 years. So you know Chris pretty well.
Yeah. And we've been friends for 45 years.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
40 years.
Yeah, 40 years. So that's a good
14 and 15 years old we met.
Because that seems to me has to be difficult for a spouse sometimes to recognize perhaps some of those areas and to lovingly help.
Yeah.
What's that like?
So first of all, I pretty much thought Chris hung the moon and stars for the first 15 years of our marriage. And then I realized he is more stubborn than me. And, I was just slow. I was slow to see some of the areas where he needed my strengths, right? And there was a process because honestly, it took us time for me to realize that we have we fit very well together. And like you said, we both have very different personalities and our methods. I'm definitely more the detail-oriented accountant kind of brain, and he's just so intelligent and has so many strengths that I didn't see that he wasn't good at these things for a long time because I was kind of enamored with him. He's my husband, right? And so our accountant actually looked at us one day, and Chris was like missing bills and things were late, and he looked at me and he said, "Wait, hold on a second. You have an accounting degree and you have the photographer doing the accounting. What is wrong with this picture?" So we obviously made that change pretty quickly, and it was just a small piece that I had. So did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so it's great. It's great to have someone from the outside also helping,
Yes.
right? Especially when you're dealing with
married.
some of some of those
Yes.
pieces
Yes.
and understanding that, because you as a husband, you want to be the hero.
And he is.
Well,
Totally
yeah.
the
So
hero.
the
100%.
yeah, well, the idea of being the provider,
Yeah.
right? Now, as Christians, and this is some context for me, because when we got married, we were not raised that way. So we knew what we wanted to do in the big picture, right?
Mhm.
Raise our kids in Christ. Our wedding vows, right? And that all we were in full agreement on all that.
Yes.
But obviously, doing it's different.
Yeah.
Executing in anything, right? Like I understand what has to happen in our business, but I struggle with doing the right things in the right order, So that's just it's the limitations that to some degree we all have. And she wrote me a letter not too long into our marriage.
14 years.
Oh, was it
It was
14?
our
Okay, it was-
14-year
it was.
anniversary.
When you've been married this long,
Yeah,
that's
it's-
not too
it's all
long.
a long
right?
time
When you've been
ago.
together for almost 40
Yeah,
plus
yeah.
years.
Well, it was our 14, and I only remember because I can see the note, and I.
Well,
my
there was the
note
letter she
on the
wrote,
back
and
of our files.
Yeah.
I gave it to you.
And she said, "Why won't you lead me?" And I was like, "Well, because really the way we joke about it now was that we were both raised feminists, and so I didn't really know what that biblically. I didn't understand what that meant. And I used to say to her, "Are you sure you want to be led?" Right? Because she's a pretty strong personality. She's very driven. She's very, everything she thinks she shares. I tend to internalize things.
It's true.
Right. And so I was like, well, I'm not sure I know what that means or that you want to. And so it began for us a deeper dive into what that actually means.
How did you feel when you read that?
Well, my first response as a man was, ouch. Right. There's a saying I always have is you can't say amen. You got to say ouch. Right. And so, but she wasn't saying that to do anything other than share with me that there was insecurity in how I was doing things, right? So we were building a photography business, and and I'm like, hey, I got ideas, right? And it was pretty easy in those days. I could go to a bridal show and book 12 weddings, right? And I could do what I do. The other thing that I still quote today, and when I talk to young couples getting married, my own kids or anybody else, she used to say to me, when I married you, I put all of my eggs in your basket, but I wish you wouldn't swing that basket around so crazy sometimes. And I was like, because, as an entrepreneur, Nate, I know you come home with ideas cost money, and your wife is fully supportive of you, but also she's like, honey, and this was her. She's like, I love that idea and I support you, but can we pay for our daughter's scoliosis treatment, or can we fix the rotting deck in the back of the house? There's real financial things attached to that. And so what I realized was I was providing, sure, and but I was also creating insecurity for my wife, right? A godly wife, and my wife does not want lots of stuff, but she would like to know.
Some stuff.
Some stuff.
But she would like to know, how's the next 6 months looking, because we have these immediate needs, or our kids have these needs, and I'd be like, as an entrepreneur, oh, it'll be fine. It'll
We
be
got
fine.
that. We got it.
We got
right?
it. We got it. And I did, honestly, though, sometimes I was thinking, I don't know if we got it.
Right. You believed. You had hope. And it's interesting. You talk about lead. First of all, yes, you get the note and says, will you lead? It can be like a cut to the heart. And at the same time, if you understand the place it's coming from a place of, I believe in you.
And it was wrapped in that.
Yeah.
I'm always careful to wrap it in the beauty of what we have and what we've been given and where I believe we're being called. And I wanted him to be called higher, you know? I
Yeah.
wanted, because I see more in him than who he sometimes sees in himself. And that's huge. I want him to see what I see. The good stuff, probably more than the bad.
And that's so, it's so endearing. And for that matter, he wants you to lead too, because this is where, you know, the two shall become one. And it's not that, and this is the thing about, you talk about feminism. Some things came out of the feminist movement that were good, some not so good, right? Here's some of it that I've unpacked. One, we're equal.
Yeah.
Right. That's equality is essential. One area that came out of it that I don't agree with is that we're the same. We're not.
Right.
We're different, and that's okay
Yes.
too. It's totally cool to be different. I love
Yes.
difference. I mean, you talk about like diversity, right? There's like you've got two diverse people. One's a male, one's a female. You're husband and wife in this relationship, right? And there's areas where you're equipped and empowered to lead
Yes.
so much better than Chris is,
Yes.
and vice versa. And so in the areas that you're called to lead, lead well. Lead higher than the standard that you set for yourself, because God has set a much higher standard for you.
Yes.
Well,
and it's taken, it's taken a long time for us to kind of flesh this out, because I was so focused on raising kids, educating children. The business was just, you know, bring in the money and let's just move forward. But now I'm enjoying it more and I'm becoming more invested. And so I am becoming a little bit more of a leader, slowly but surely, finding my strengths and learning to stay in my lane.
And that's
Right?
important to know what your lane is, first of all.
That's what
right?
we're figuring out.
Well,
Yes.
and you know, coming through the ups and downs of the photography world, and then we were doing a lot of video marketing for a world, and I got to take my kids with me while I traveled. Such rich experiences through all that. Finding your lane is also, sometimes you have to occupy every lane until you can afford to replace you or outsource, right? So we always grapple with that. And then what was born out of that for a while was a scarcity mindset, right? You know, sometimes we're saving pennies, pinching pennies, and then preventing growth, right?
Yes.
But
yeah.
Yes.
Pitching pennies and missing nickels.
Yes.
missing nickels, right, or missing dollars.
Missing dollars, yeah.
And that was that's part of where we are now in the business that we're building now, which is an entirely different world. You know, we transitioned from the creative business to we wanted to teach our kids entrepreneurship as homeschoolers, because I've always believed an entrepreneur, you've got to learn everything. There's nothing you don't learn if you try and build a business. Everything: accounting, bookkeeping, tax law, negotiations, customer service, scalability, marketing, you name it.
Systems.
So we thought, systems. So we thought this would be a great way to start as homeschoolers, an all-encompassing sort of approach to it. And but I also knew enough through my experience too to know that I don't know how to build $1 million company. I know what to do, but I don't know how to do it. And there's a big difference there. Like I could tell you what you need to get to, and I know the KPIs of my industry, of our industry, and that kind of thing. But I've got some real, we both talked about this. I have some real limiting self-beliefs, right, that hold me back sometimes. And so us getting to that next level with this business was really a seismic mind shift in how I think about myself and about what I'm able to do. And so we're still working through all that now, but that was part of that process.
Well, and it's important, and just almost thematically looking at this position of leadership and knowing. You had mentioned when we first started, look, there's a lot of things you don't do well. There's a lot of things all of us don't do well, but there's a few things we can execute on very well. In fact, that Steve Jobs said this when he came back to Apple. He said, Apple's been executing wonderfully on all the wrong things, or maybe the wrong things, right? Like that's what a great way to illustrate entrepreneurship, because as entrepreneurs, we have to execute, but we're executing wonderfully on a lot of the wrong things because that's not our genius. And to your point, even with the family dynamics, I remember the same conversation I had with my wife years ago. Very strong woman. And growing up, in the same sort of like culture as you, Chris. I'm like, well, I don't want to overstep, and I don't want to offend, and I don't want to be too much of a man. I don't want to be, I don't want to be too like old school manly.
Right.
Like this is the way we're doing things.
Right.
And she called me out. She's like, hey, you need to lead our family.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah, good for her.
Okay,
How do we do that?
okay. Let me reprogram some of my thing. And what she's like, hey, I want you to lead us in Christ. Your son wants you to lead us in Christ. You're the person for the job. And at first, same thing, like oof. And then of course, there can be like, well, I thought I was, or I am. Yeah, I've got it together. I'm like, no.
Well, and
maybe not.
I think providing is where we fall into that. We default that right away.
That's your default, right? Oh well, you got money. Your bills are paid, right? Even if they're not, even if everything isn't perfect, we're surviving.
We all play to our strengths.
And she'd always say, "You're providing very well. No complaints."
Yeah.
However, as a wife, and I'd be like, "Ouch!" That can't say man, got to say ouch thing. And 15 years ago, God called us to homeschool our kids, and that was a real reflective shift in how we were doing everything. And I went to this first homeschool. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, you really stepped into a leadership role when we started homeschooling.
Well, yeah, and I heard a speaker at this first conference, and we were there at that first conference, not even knowing how to homeschool. We're like, do we need to put desks in our dining room? I mean, how do we do this? And all the veterans who'd been doing it for years said, oh, you can do whatever you want to do. And we're like, oh, okay. But the speakers that I heard there were speaking, one I heard just specifically speaking to me as a man, as a husband and a father, really laid out this idea that hit me right between the eyes. And in terms of the homeschooling journey, it's not about academic prowess. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. It's about discipling your family, your kids. And discipleship was not a word that really thought much through. And discipleship meant not just writing a check for curriculum, right? Or just providing for your family, however big your house is or whatever. Discipleship is actually walking alongside your children and pouring into them when they were young. It looks different. And so we both got on board right away with homeschooling, but then there was some redefinition of roles, right? Because my wife's, she was going to jump into actually educating our kids.
Were they currently in the school system?
Mm-hmm.
Our daughter was in 3rd grade and our son was in kindergarten. And then the 2 littles were just at home, right?
Home.
So they finished that year and then came home.
And how was that transition in terms of even explaining, of course, your 3rd grader more than anything, of like, hey, you're not going to be going back.
Well, we actually,
I love this story.
So first of all, God called us to this. I'd been praying about it, and I finally went to Chris and said, Chris, I think God wants us to homeschool. And he said, thank you, Jesus, because I was not going to bring it up to you. I didn't want to. Right?
But I was on my heart too.
But he had, right. And so, of course, we did what we do when we bought McKenna a book, because she was an avid reader, about this girl who started homeschooling. And she immediately, of course, is like, you're going to homeschool. And we're like, well, I don't know. And so, she was all on board. I think she transitioned well.
I'm sorry, we actually used to threaten her with leaving schooling before that. Like, if you don't get your act together, we may homeschool you.
Yeah.
She'd be like,
it was a joke.
Yeah.
How did we know? We didn't know.
Right.
We had no intention of homeschooling. Like, only weirdos do that. And here we are, right?
Joining the weirdo revolution.
Absolutely.
Right? And what were some of the reasons why you felt called to that?
I mean, truly, we did not have an intention. We thought our school was fine. We thought they were doing well. I was looking forward to the kids all being in school so Chris and I could go to lunch together and I could work in the business more. I mean, we had a plan.
We had it all figured out.
We did. And because
it's a huge undertaking.
Yes.
And it's a major life change.
Yes. And so it was truly, and I don't know if you want to include this or not, because it was truly God whispering in my ear, and I was in the kitchen, and I am not kidding. I was just like doing this. And finally I said, fine, I'll pray about it. I told the God of the universe that he's putting something on my heart. I'm like, okay, fine, I'll pray about it. I'll yeah, right?
We'll get back to you on it.
We'll get back to you.
Yeah. And probably for a month. And then sure enough, I told Chris, and the next day a friend came over, a younger friend who didn't even have kids old enough to start schooling yet, came over and said, hey, there's a homeschool conference. Would you want to go with me? I'm like, okay, Lord, we're doing this. And so.
And were you working outside of the home at the time?
No.
And so you had the photography business at the time, Chris?
Photography business, we moved into a big house.
Mm-hmm.
that we justified, and it worked out. But it was because we could have customers and employees in a different level, and so.
And was this public school or private school?
Public school.
Okay, so public school.
And
So
we didn't have any particular gripes about the school. I mean, McKenna was a little superstar.
Yeah.
Hamilton had just gone for 1 year of half-day kindergarten, so he was cool. And he was like,
Yeah,
"We're staying home,
Yeah.
cool," whatever. But that's how I go back to that first time that I was challenged about discipling your children, right? Because we were already having these conversations like, 4 kids, if we're going to play, if each going to play 2 sports and all these things, what are we going to be doing for 10 years, 15 years? Just driving them around and then making them food? You know what I mean? We just thought about that way, but we didn't know, but that wasn't us thinking about not doing that, which is like, it's going to be really hard to do all these things that we thought you're supposed to do. And because I worked from home, it was great because even when they were going to school, I could have lunch with them every day, and I sort of loved all that. We were very blessed to be able to always be around each other a lot. My business allowed me to work from home and then work weekends or travel, but it was the discipleship thing. And then I was challenged by that same speaker. He says, if you open up the Bible and read the Word of God, it's got a lot to say about education, but never once does it reference Caesar or somebody else. To do that.
That's right.
It was mostly letters to the Father, right? To walk alongside your children day and night. And we're like, and that really struck us. Mm-hmm. But again, we're thinking in the way almost everybody else does. How do you do that, right? And then God began to show us that because of the kind of business I have, I can really roll them into experiencing it with me, which was great. And I like to be the dad who's like, hey, if there's a meteor shower, we're going to get up at 2 a.m. And she's like, good for you, Dad. You do that. So I was the fun homeschool dad.
Oh, no, we did it. I did it with you once until we're all laying on the ground and we realized there was something flying over us. Oh, it's bats. There are bats flying right over our heads and we're all laying on the ground. So we exited pretty quickly and that became a dad job.
And I really believe that, and I don't care who you are, whatever you do for a living, you can open that part of your life with your kids and teach them so much, right? And so dads have a real opportunity to share and also share the struggles, right? So we would tell our kids, so one thing we wanted to teach them, right? The Word of God, financial literacy, because we didn't grow up with that. So we burned through some money in our early days because we just, and service, right? Serve.
And it was the 4 L's. Right. Love the Lord, love labor, love learning, and love liberty.
Yeah.
That was our goal in teaching.
And even on the days where I remember I'd come home because wives, of course, feel the real pressure of homeschooling their kids. And there were days where she'd be like, oh, I don't know if I did a good job today. I'd be like, did you love them? Yeah. I said, that's better than any day in public school.
He was the most
Did you teach him the book of Proverbs? That's what, if you only had one textbook, that's the best textbook in the world. And so I loved encouraging her because she took it on wholeheartedly. But there's still times where, same thing in business or in homeschooling, where you look around and go, oh my gosh, are we doing a good job? Are our kids going to be okay? Nate's kids are super smart. How about, are we doing enough with our kids? That happens. That's natural to compare. But once she got her feet underneath her, she was an awesome homeschool mom.
Indeed. Yeah. The homeschool environment it's from the outside looking in. Some people are concerned about whether or not there's going to be social interaction and the education quality and all this other stuff.
A little too much, honestly.
Right. Maybe more social interaction. Yeah. However, there is that one, and we homeschooled our son, and it's not easy. It's not easy, and that's the thing. However, the cost it comes with is worth the reward. It's worth the sacrifice, 100%. If you will. And so much of what you're describing, what that environment allows you to do, it allows you to fine tune and tailor the academic experience. And so for us, just having that ability to tailor it to your children's strengths it's so life-giving for them, and to give them that. And you can have some flexibility in how you do it. And of course, as you know, homeschooling isn't there's no summer break, right? There is, but there isn't. It's year round. You're educating them. This is the brain doesn't stop learning 3 months out of the year.
It's what we do in life, is it not? I mean, when you graduated from school, you didn't just stop learning. Most of the things I learned that are worthwhile, I learned after college, and really in the past 10 years. So teaching our children to have that kind of hunger and thirst for learning, I think, is important. And I think that you're very good at inspiring that. I assuming with your son, I don't know a lot about how he was educated, but it appears you do, because I know how much you inspire us in our business and in our entrepreneurial journey.
Absolutely. And that learning and that learning environment that you foster and create, that's lifelong.
Yeah.
That's a lifelong. And here's the other part about it. And I went to public school. I don't know if you guys went to public or private school. And so no knock on public school. However, my experience was it was a social community, a lot of social idea, and not for everyone, but for the vast majority of high schoolers, you want to be accepted.
Right.
So there's all different, and we didn't really have much money, so I couldn't wear like the cool clothes like everybody else had. You remember those days, like when somebody'd come in with some Z Cavaricis or God knows what else that
we don't even know what that is.
Oh yeah. I just saw a kid wearing Adidas shoes, and I'd have to get tracks from Kmart because
that's
it's like, no, I don't want to wear those shoes, and Mom would be like, you're wearing those shoes. I'm like, all right, I'd rather go barefoot than be ridiculed. However, there's a lot of inefficiency in our educational experience, and again, I mean, there's a lot of benefit to public education as opposed to no education at all.
Sure, well, I always said that the one thing our kids didn't learn right away was how to stand in line.
They figured it out
at the lunch line.
They figured it out eventually.
The ice cream truck comes by and the kids are like, oh, that's what we have to do? No problem.
But we were very intentional because, again, we would tell our kids, we don't have the money to go to Disney World, for example, and here's why, right? Just show them the numbers, right? I think that's a great education. And then when my kids got a little bit older, I could say, hey, if I'm going to take McKenna and Hamilton with me on a photo shoot, which means I don't have to hire an assistant, then, or take McKenna, then if you guys can help out more at home because they're gone, that's all part of the family economic thing. So what we really framed it as is family economics, which just means that, Dad might get the paycheck, but how my wife Dina actually spends the paycheck or budgets the paycheck or turns that roast into soup for a week, all those things are incredibly valuable, and our culture has dismissed that. We tell women today, you're only worth anything if you have a W-2, right? And what a industrious wife can do, during the feast times, but also the famine times, right? And so, hey kids, this year we're gonna go to 5 parks this summer and have picnics as opposed to going to Disney World. They still have the experience with family and understand that economics are a real thing. Because then what I tried to parlay that into for them as they got older was, to my daughters, if you want to stay home and raise your kids at home, which we think is the best solution, but it's a choice, there's an economic attachment to that, right? And so, and to my son, the same thing. So, we had these conversations, and I'll give you an example if I can. We went to Washington, D.C. to photograph a law firm and did a bunch of video work and a bunch of photography, and I brought McKenna and Hamilton with me. And this law firm was probably 70% women, very successful, very highly paid. You could see all the Lexuses in the parking garage, paid and earned and deserve every penny of it, right? They were engineers who became patent lawyers, right? And my daughter I put her in charge, and she loved it. She was like 14 at the time, I think. I go, honey, you're going to be in charge of scheduling all the lawyers and telling them when to come down. And she was like, oh. So she got to be that, right? And my son was my lighting assistant and all that kind of thing. And but I actually made them listen to McKenna. I said, do you think, because we go into these offices and these very successful, very, very nice, smart women, many of them had just the pictures of their kids on their cubicle wall, and we're working 12-hour days, right? So they're paying daycare, private school, whatever, and their Lexuses were sitting in the parking garage, and they would share they were working 5-6 days a week, so multiple 6-figure earners to be sure. And I said, do you think you would rather make that kind of money, right? And with that comes sacrifices. You can't have it all. You can, if you're going to choose that direction, then you won't be around your family as much. Or if you're going to choose like your mom did, you won't be able to make as much money as, my wife has 2 degrees. I have none. So I always say she probably had the bigger potential.
But I didn't have the desire.
You didn't have the desire. But I said to her, my daughter, I go, would you rather your mom have been home with you all these years and teaching you and all that, and or make the kind of money? She goes, oh, I'm so glad mom stayed home. So she got to actually see it and experience it. And that was my hope through the homeschool discipleship journey, was to show my kids through our ability to travel, what opportunities were out there for them. There's nothing holding them back, right? And I would love my kids no matter what they chose. But that I think for family and for children, if possible, the real value, but there's an economic spreadsheet you can put that if you want to.
Oh, yeah.
And so we kind of broke that down for them, did a lot of Dave Ramsey financial literacy basic stuff for them. And at least my first 2 kids who are now married are pretty frugal and married young. So yeah.
Savers.
Taught them the way. And, some kids might say, no, I would have rather you've gone to work, right? I mean, in your case, that worked out. That was a win. Right. And at the same time, what I'm hearing and our experience as well is that fine tuning of the educational environment and academia also fine tunes their future. And that's so critical. You've heard, and not only their future, but also it challenges us as parents to step up.
Yes.
In a big way. And I'm sure it's challenged you along the way, Dina.
Learned so much. But this whole journey, what I loved was the richness of it. From the day we brought our kids home from school, it has been a family team effort. And so Chris jumped into this role of, we would do family devotions in the morning, and he's so brilliant that he would cover 5 subjects, political, socioeconomical, all of these things going on in the world. And I'm just like checking the box. Okay, guys, time for a hike. Let's go. But in general, the reality is it was a very rich, beautiful life. When you're an entrepreneur, what is the old saying? You work 12 hours a day, but you get to choose which 12 hours of the day it is. Yeah. And Chris was very good at intentionally being available for us and making opportunities for us to travel to, we went to Lunenburg, Nova Scotia, and we traveled for a month. We traveled to Colorado for a few weeks. And so he took the kids on to California and to Detroit and Washington, D.C. and all of these places. And they had opportunities to sit at the feet of extremely successful CEOs and multimillionaire leaders. Also, they met a recovered drug addict that was one of the biggest drug lords, like in Hawaii or something. I don't remember. But, our kids, they were not sheltered. They were protected, but they were not sheltered in a way that would hinder their growth. And I think that I was just going to say this. So the whole entrepreneurial journey, while it has had its challenges, it has been an amazing life experience for all of us. And in the end, well, of course, we all want security and we all want a few nice things and nice vacations and that. The richness of the past, McKenna's 25 years of raising kids has been amazing. And I wouldn't trade it. Would I have done some things differently as an entrepreneur? I probably would have jumped in a little sooner and been more of a help instead of just literally passing it all off to him, expecting him to do everything. But we learned.
Yeah, we did. And I think I've always said homeschooling is like the entrepreneurial response to education.
I agree.
Right? Which means you're going to do it all in the beginning, and even if you don't know how to do it, right? The same thing when you start a business. Very few people start a business with everything and all their ducks in a row.
Or get married or have children.
Right, yeah. So, and the transition from the creative world of photography, where it was all me, right? I used to say, fortunately, it never happened, but man, if I ever had gotten sick or hurt, I'm refunding a lot of money for that weekend because I'm doing high-end weddings right all around the country. And fortunately, it never happened. But as God begin to give us a clear vision for what this new business will be, what its purpose is, besides funding the rest of our life, because this is our retirement. We don't have a 401k. We don't have, a large savings account. So this business will be what funds the rest of our life. And we'll talk about the heart attack and some of those perspective things too. But I told my kids, I go, I'm much more excited about something as unsexy as window cleaning in terms of scalability and the ability to create potentially millions of dollars of revenue than photography ever was. So while photography was great for me, my ego, we now build a business where no one knows my name, and that's okay, because what we can do in our community, what we can do with the people that we bring into the company, the culture we build, is far greater in a service business, you know? So we kind of put that in front of our kids when they were younger teenagers, like, hey, we're going to do this, and we're going to show you how all about it. And they've all worked at it in various forms or another. And my son's on a job today. Although he's moving into firefighting now, he's still a good tech. He's out there.
He doesn't have work on other places. Hey, Dad, what you got for me now?
Yeah, hey,
It's some hours. I'm like,
cash.
you're a great technician, so get up. So
Love it.
Well, you've hit on so many things, and one of them that keeps coming back up is time. We only have so much time while we're here, and eventually we'll be at the end of this journey and this side of heaven. You look back and you're like, well, yeah, what's the greatest impact? What's my greatest impact? And truly, your greatest impact, at least the way I understand it, is your family. It's your number one ministry.
Yep.
And that's who we're called to serve first, before anyone else, before the business, before our community, before anyone else.
Yeah.
Because tomorrow's not guaranteed.
Right.
In fact, you did have a heart attack.
Right.
You didn't expect it.
No.
You weren't planning for it. You didn't say, well, here's on this date on the calendar. What day was it?
July 14th, 2020.
She remembers for sure.
July 14, 2023 wasn't marked on the calendar. Hey, Chris is going to have his heart attack today. We need to be ready for it. We need to have invested wisely in the most precious resource, those who we love, throughout our lifetime. You did that, but you're still here. What'd you learn from that heart attack?
So a heart attack or a terminal illness, anything like that, there's a lot to the recovery. And it's not just the physical, there's the spiritual, emotional thing, which that was surprising. You know, I didn't understand that. You go through a lot. And
because you don't even remember the initial part of the recovery.
No, all I remember.
You do.
I do.
What was going on?
Well, he had come home from an F3 workout, and our son, just by the grace of God, we had just moved into a new house, but his room was uninhabitable, so he's sleeping in our living room. And if he had not been sleeping in our living room, when Chris walked in the door, and he just said, Hamilton, I need to go to the hospital, and he doesn't remember any of it. And we were 7 minutes from the hospital.
And an F3 workout, they're pretty intense.
Yeah. But I mean, it would have happened either way. It would have happened either way. And he drove him immediately to the hospital. So first of all, I'm so thankful that was the case. All of those things working together so that he got there.
And we just moved there. We were 2 minutes from the hospital.
Yes.
So that was also
exactly
a blessing.
So surgery, they didn't know if he was going to make it. It was hard. It was real. I mean, I had a peace about me because of my faith, and I know that he knew we loved him. We knew that he loved us. We knew he was in the Lord. So in that sense, it was very easy. Seeing him come out of surgery and being all intubated and tubed up and not being able to speak or communicate in any way, it was hard. It was painful for the kids to see and walk through that, of course. But they were so supportive. Our kids just came and they were there. And that's another one of those moments where you go, okay, we are rich.
Yeah. And you were, and before you were holding, you weren't conscious.
Right.
You were having to hold it together.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
I will tell you that it was truly, I felt the Lord's presence so sweetly that at night when I would go home, I would climb in bed and I would have some tears in my eyes, but I literally felt like the Lord was just holding me. I felt like I was resting in the lap of my Savior. And some people may think that sounds crazy, but it was the most beautiful, amazing experience. And we had those. You stepped in and set up some helpful things for us. And everyone was so generous in helping us get through that season of unknowing, not knowing what was going to happen. But I knew that I didn't have to worry about some certain financial things, and my kids were taking care of the house, and you can tell them about what the kids said about the business that day.
Yeah, and somebody in our community from our church stepped in. So it was a blessing to see to learn about it later, because I was kind of out of it. And I do have some vignettes. I remember being out. So I was probably out for 5 or 6 days.
Yeah.
2 or 3 more than probably the normal, but I think as I heard it when I was waking up, I became a little belligerent because I was strapped down. So they're like, I think we should sustain him a little longer.
And they said that could happen, and they said he may panic, and I said, well, Chris does not like to be tied down at all, so he will probably panic, and he did.
But there are vignettes. So I can remember people talk, whatever, like even the nurses and the doctor, right before the surgery, I can remember him talking in a real heavy Italian accent or whatever. But in my recovery, it was still being out. I do remember a couple things. One, my wife praying blessings over me in my ear. Men, find yourself a woman who will pray blessings over you when you can't.
Can I just add to that? I literally every day, I went in to see him, and I would immediately get right in his face, and I'd pray, and I'd tell him, I'd just say, honey, come back, just come back, because they didn't know if or when he was going to wake up. Everything looked fine. He should wake up, but you don't know. And I would just pet his head, and I would get close, and I would just, honey, please come back. We have so much more life to live. And
I do remember some of that, hearing some of those things.
Were you in a coma? Was he in a coma at the time?
Medically induced coma.
Medically induced coma. So you
kept me sedated for 5 or 6 days. Sorry.
Yeah.
Because of the way the way I responded when I first was waking up. And now the other memory I have, my kids being there, I can remember hearing that. So the truth is, if you're in a coma, you can hear people talking. You just can't respond. And
it's important.
They were talking about the business, how to keep it going. And my son's like, well, we got these jobs and whatever. And then McKenna, remember my daughter McKenna saying something like, boy, Dad, I bet you wish you were awake, because we're about to burn this thing to the ground. And I remember thinking to myself, laughing, going, that's very funny, but I can't respond. I'm just like, I'm still like this. And I remember my daughter coming in one night by herself and praying in my ear for me. And so all that stuff, and any family would do that, I think, or most families would do that. But that reminded me that the richness of family is just that, right? That you would do anything for each other. When we raised our kids, we told them we would do anything for you. We would die for you. And that's true, right? As soon as you have a baby, that's day one, you're like, I will do anything in this world to protect this child, right? As they get older, of course, and you go to that, I've always said that when my kids were in the daddy phase, where you come home, they're like, Daddy's home, right? I'm like, that's prime real estate, because you can't do anything wrong when you're daddy, right? Everything you say is the gospel truth, and they worship you, right? And then about 12 or 13, it goes to dad. And that's not a bad thing. But when they go to dad, now they have some questions. They may not believe everything you say. They have some pushback, right? And that's normal. And my kids all went to dad. And but through my illness, through that heart attack, boy, I saw them rally for my wife and for us, because the heart attack also made something clear. The business we have now couldn't keep going.
Because you were everything to it.
Yeah, I'm still everything to it, right? Yeah. My wife wouldn't have known what to do. She couldn't have plugged into keeping the marketing stuff going. My son was moving into firefighting, and so which is great. We're so proud of him for that, right? He's always been that kind of young man, and so it wouldn't have gone on. And so while we knew that before the heart attack was sort of a rubber stamp on get this thing to the next level, so that if this were to happen again, because mathematically speaking, my wife will probably outlive me, if that's because that's the laws of averages, and plus I've already had a major heart attack. So we want this business for to fund the rest of our lives and whoever lives longer until we die. That's number one, right? But then also how we want to take this and transform our community through initiatives that we've prayed about and talked about. And that's, so the heart attack was just a reminder. It's time to spend money. For me, coaching, right? Getting coaching in my industry, so that we're hitting, because we know we see some real traction, but it's just a matter of doing the right things in the right order. So, so we're very excited. I know I am too, of the role she's taken and what the next couple of years are going to bring. But the heart attack puts it all in perspective, because had I passed away, it wouldn't have been a thing that could really keep going.
But thank you for asking that, because it's a good reminder. It's great to be able to look back and see the big picture of how beautifully our family and our friends and our colleagues all pulled together. And it really felt, not to be contrite, but kind of it's a wonderful life feeling when you look and see all the people who love you and care about you, and you've affected their life in some way in a positive fashion. We didn't have anyone come up negatively, so we're hoping it's all good.
Well, it's interesting. We just had that on last night. It's a Wonderful Life, and I was talking to my wife. Of course, many people have seen it many, many times over, and I was talking to her about good old George. Like, it took him forever to figure out that he was never born. Like, bro.
Yeah.
I mean, how many people do you have to see who don't recognize you for you to get through your skull? And I'm like, yeah, but that's not just George Bailey. Yeah. It's. I think we can all identify with. Sometimes it just like you have to either you have to see someone else experience something like that to wake up, or experiencing it yourself to recognize, oh.
And I'm in the hospital, and I'm aware of people that have no family coming to visit them. Right. And I just remember telling my wife that in our entrepreneurial journey, there were times where things were tough. We're not sure where the cash flow is coming in, and she's pretty nervous. And I would say to her, honey, we're not going to live under a bridge. She goes, oh, you don't know that. We might just end up under a bridge. And I'm like,
no, we know enough people. We wouldn't be under.
Right. And
we have enough rich relationships. We'd be fine.
Right, and we've been blessed because because of my nature and being involved in Christian community and Christian business leaders, I've got to know a lot of wonderful men and families who are gospel focused, but also successful entrepreneurs. And I've asked them, hey, can I sit at your table? Can you share? And people, and some of these men have been very generous in sharing their information for us, and I was able to sit my kids at their feet. And, when my kids were younger, they probably didn't see the value in that. But I'm like, trust me, if this guy says he can meet with us at 5 a.m. on Thursday, we should definitely take that meeting. But it's 5 a.m. I go, trust me, you'll understand more later on that what that person might be able to offer you, not just in their wisdom, but also their connections, right? Their connections are a part of relationship building and a network of people. So what we learned through the heart attack, too, was that had I passed away, there had been a lot of fires to put out. Our community of people would have come alongside, because they called me. They told me as much. Hey, if something had happened, I would have reached out to Dina, right? So, there's that's where your richness and wealth comes in. It's the Wonderful Life sort of story too. And when you're young, like our kids, they don't necessarily see that when they're 17, but as they get older and they can tap into that community as well so I think that became apparent.
There's no more valuable currency on the planet, and I've struggled to identify more valuable currency. Being in the financial services sector all these years, people say, well, it's your savings account, it's now your digital currency account, or whatever, your retirement, your stocks, et cetera, et cetera. I found no more valuable currency than social currency, relational capital, the capital that we develop through the relationships we have, the depth of connections. We're not meant to be alone, and that's part of where we run into troubles when we isolate ourselves, or when we don't spend time doing some of the hard stuff. Like you said, hey, you know what? If it's 5 a.m., I know this is important to ROI on this relationship, and others recognize that. Like, wow, you got up at 4 o'clock in the morning or 4:30 just to learn from me, or spend time with me. Like, that's powerful.
Nate, and I'm going to give you a plug here, because when you started the mastermind group and invited me into that, I was so thrilled. And I said, hey, can I put my son at this table too? Because, wow, what can you imagine? I was imagining what it'd be like if I had that. And you said, sure, bring him on in.
Yeah.
And so for the first couple of years, he was sitting in those meetings and he saw the emotional journey that all these entrepreneurs were going on. Remember, there was some hot seats where people brought in their partners, right? And it was a hash out the hard parts of it, and there were tears. And my son was like slack-jawed going, wow. I go, yeah, entrepreneurship is hard. And he and I tried to form a partnership, but we went through the same process of it's hard to come to agreement because we're built differently. We value things differently. And but because I think that we were both at your feet in that room was so beneficial. My son now, I think, gleans real value from that today. Because he, even though he's not in anymore because he's doing firefighting, he's like, man, how's Nate doing? How's Sal? And, or he'll ask how
How's
people are doing
PJ?
because they all, huh?
How's PJ?
How's PJ going? Right. Yeah. So that's what so when the homeschool entrepreneurship thing that I tried to blend together, I would ask, can I bring my kids to this meeting? And to a man and a woman, they said, sure, we'd love to see them there. So we had sometimes I'd meeting with CEOs of companies about marketing stuff or whatever. And they'd look at my kids and go, shouldn't you be in school? And they're like, we are in school, sir.
Well, remember the law firm? The CEO actually asked you to lunch because he wanted to know what it was you were doing and you had your kids with you.
And I tell my kids, always ask 2 questions that CFOs or CEOs would find. And so my daughter asked a question about cash flowing a law firm with that many billable hours. And he's like, my own lawyers don't even ask me that. I said, that's how you learn. And by the way, if now you've got a relationship with somebody that could be valued just in life, but also down the road as you seek other opportunities, So that's been a real blessing of building that community and being able to plug my kids in as much as I possibly could along the way.
The community is such an important part of this story. And of course, when Hamilton, your son, went on his way, and then we saw Dina come and become part of the mastermind experience, and then you began to be poured into.
Well, let's
developed as a leader.
What did the circle tell me?
Oh, well, the circle told you.
It said, "You're fired."
You're fired.
Yeah.
You're fired. We, Dina.
Yeah.
You now have the calm, right?
And I've pulled it once or twice. I pulled the I'm the CEO card a couple of times, and but this whole everything we're talking about here, it's rich. I mean, being an entrepreneur, you could be an accountant, get your CPA, go to work for a firm, be there your whole life, have a steady income, and your life would be fine if that's your choice. For us, we were willing to take the risks, both with our children, how we raise them, their education, all those things, and entrepreneurship, because it's so rich. The highs are high, the lows are lows, but in those lows, we usually grow closer to God and each other.
And that's a good point to make in terms of how you're growing, what you're doing to invest and reinvest, who you're surrounding yourself with. I was just talking to my wife about environment and nature nurture type stuff, right? Once your traits are set and you get through life, from there it's the skills and the environment that you're in. Your environment plays a critical role. I mean, critical role in who you become. As you've heard the saying, show me your friends, I'll show you your future.
Yes.
Right? It's real. It is 100%. And we have to make a determination and make the choice of what environment, what seat, at what table we want to sit at, because that is what will create we're pliable. One of the blessings of humanity is that we're pliable. Mm-hmm. It's also one of the dangers is that we're pliable.
Right.
And so how do we want to be molded and shaped? What are the influences around us? And I know, Dina, even you coming into the mastermind environment, you were embraced. And because you had some self-limiting beliefs. We all do.
Sure.
You have some doubts, even in your own journey.
Absolutely. I do, because the reality is I went to college because I wanted to get my MRS degree. And that's just truth. I wanted to get married. I always wanted to get married. I wanted to have a family. I never told anyone that.
My MRS.
My
degree, I
MRS
get it.
degree, right? Yeah.
It took me a second. I'm like, what's that? And I was like,
She wanted to marry
yeah.
an educated man.
Well, I just knew I wanted to stay home with my children, but I didn't tell anyone that because that was socially, not acceptable really in the 90s to say I want to stay home. So I got my career started and set. But the day that we had McKenna, I literally looked at her and I thought, I am never going back to work. And so when it was, there was a little bit of conflict in me when it was time for me to step into the business because I'm not finished being the stay-at-home, home educating mom, and so
which is a role that it's a very difficult, by the way.
Yeah.
If you stay at home, you don't stop working. You don't leave the work world.
Yes.
It's a different role and responsibility.
And I loved it.
It's incredibly important.
Yes.
And I grew up in the 90s. And for those of us who did grow up in the 90s, yes, you may forget, there was a huge push. Say, well, if you're not a career woman,
Right.
you're kind of taking a pay cut. You're just, and that's wrong.
There's a
that's
less
simply
than view.
wrong to have a less than view.
Yes.
If you're a career person, more power to you.
Yep.
If you're a person who wants to stay at home and raise a family, more power to you. But don't despair or don't look down on someone who simply wants to be the person who raises their family.
Right.
What a great honor if that's your lane. And
It was truly the most amazing home educating our kids. And so the last 15 years has been the most amazing journey, and I've loved it. And now I am, over the past year, I'm beginning to embrace going into business because all the rest of our lives it's growing and moving along. But I'm excited. I'm excited about what this next couple of years brings, and I'm excited about our relationship, how it's changing. And I appreciate so much this talk we're having because it's reminding me of that big picture, because I do tend to get caught in the details and I forget to look up at the sunrise.
Yeah, there was a season when we were downsizing. So photography was kind of dying, right? We saw the writing on the wall and we were thinking about, doing other things, but we had to downsize from our big house in St. Louis County. We got the blessing of moving out to a smaller house, but on 100 acres. So our kids got to spend the crux of their life growing up on 120 acres on the Mississippi River, which means we could blow stuff up and burn stuff. And it was all
and
awesome.
hike every day.
And that was a great place to homeschool too, but when we were downsizing, people would say, well, why don't you just go back to work?
Right.
Because she's got 2 college degrees. I have none. And she could step right back into the work world and made a good income. And we were like, we're not going to.
Wait. You kind of looked at me like.
No, not then. No. Now, when we had our first baby.
Maybe just part-time.
No.
And I was like,
no, the first baby when we had, the conversation was, because I was starting the photography business. So, not making much money yet. She had been a bank auditor and an accountant. So, I was like, maybe for another year you could stay home while I get there. She's like, figure it out because I ain't going back to work, which is actually good motivation for a man too. Whatever you're trying to do, career or business, get your act together because baby's here. And it was great because mom's like, and she said, they will forget about me the following Monday and have a new nameplate on the door. Yep. So they don't need me. Not going to miss me. So that process of downsizing was, people were saying a lot of, they meant well. I mean, nothing wrong, but they're like, well, just go keep the house. You don't want to sell the house. I'm like, the house is the last thing we wanted to keep.
It's just a thing.
In the name of our children, right? It was just 2 extra bathrooms we never used anyway. So downsizing people, but that's kind of the pressure you feel, like you don't want to give up material things. Absolutely, actually. Giving up material things is a perfectly good way to go if it means keeping the more important things together in the dynamic of your family.
And sometimes it's good to just purge.
Yes.
Yeah, hit reset on some of those material things. It actually can bring you even closer together. In fact, I'll to the end of this. We downsized not because we wanted to, but because I had invested in a business that was almost bankrupted us, And we went from a really big house to a little villa, and we were just talking about this the other day, and it was the closest we had ever been when we were together in a tightly knit environment, and all that material was not even a consideration. Sometimes that's a good thing.
And I would say, I'm sorry, honey, go.
I was just going to say, the reminder that it's not the end, and it's not always going to be like this, whatever it is. And so what do you want most out of life? For us, it's been freedom to do and live our life as we choose with our family and with our friends and colleagues. And it's a totally different mindset when you're an entrepreneur. Everything's different. And like Chris said, carrying that into home education, it's the same thing. It's the entrepreneurial of
Yeah. And now that the window is closing a little bit on homeschooling, we've got really a 17-year-old at home still. Our why is shifted, and the why of the business we're building beyond our own financial goals. Like I always said, I like to hand her a decent car once in a while, which we were able to do this last year, instead of all the turd balls we've been driving. However,
they've all been fine.
In that process of downsizing materially, now it can cause a lot of stress, and we've had stressful times to be sure, but as we downsized with our kids and we began to homeschool and do other things, I believe it drew us closer together and our family closer together. And had we just only gone up, I don't know, who knows? I'd like to think we would have adjusted accordingly. She's always saying she's willing to try. I don't want to be rich, but I'm willing to give it a shot.
People say it'll ruin you, but I don't know. I'm
However, now we have a why behind our current business too. And so in the service business that we're building now, we want to be able to work with nonprofits and take kids coming out of foster care, because this is where my heart is, because that's my upbringing was without a father. So, and plug them into a company that will offer them not only a good job, but actual mentorship, right? So that second seat sort of, I say foundation, but that second seat on the truck is a chance for someone who can grow with the company and move to the first seat. And then also, my wife's got a real heart for kids coming out of sex trafficking. So there's some real opportunities that we believe, and we're actually working on building a network of other Christ-centered service companies. Because in this world where everybody wants less employees, a service business like ours, you need people. And I'm looking forward to hiring people. But we can't do that until this is where you're helping us, right? Where your numbers and your systems and everything else to get to that place. But we're on the cusp of that too. So,
and your heart is in the right place. Your heart is to serve, and we know that the greatest among us is a servant. And it's interesting you bring up wealth. When Tara and I, my wife and I, were earlier in our relationship, and we were talking about the future, and she had made the comment. She said, "Well, when we get to a certain amount of comfortability, dollars-wise," she even threw out a number. She said, "I just want to give the rest away." And I was like, "Say what?" Do what? And that challenged me. But I began to embrace that construct later, because what she meant was we want to be generous with the time, the talents, the treasures that we have been entrusted with.
Yes.
Because look, we're stewards, we're shepherds. One day we won't be here. One day we'll be standing in front of God, and what we want most is, "Well done, good and faithful servant." That's what we want to hear.
And on this side of heaven, how great does it feel to pour into someone's life and see them make different choices, or see them prosper, whether it's mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, whatever direction that is. But being able to pour into someone else's life, there's richness in that. And it's a joy.
Yeah, because there are zero U-Hauls following that hearse, right?
That's
to
right.
the cemetery, unless you're Egyptian, an ancient pharaoh, and you want everything buried with you. That's not happening anymore, right? The only real valuable commodity that's going with us are people.
In fact, the only thing that you might recognize in heaven that you had anything to do with might be very well your children, or the ones that you share the gospel with, or whatever. That's the only treasure you may even recognize in heaven. It won't be the stuff. But I also know that what we want to do, the why now, is we need money to do it.
Yeah.
Right. So we can't, if I'm working with a seat at the table and Bob Sturgis or other nonprofits and they say, hey, I've got a young man who'd be a great candidate for you. He's recommending to us. We can't hire a charity case, but we can hire someone's recommended that, hey, they got a spark. We'd love to pour into that young man and get him a good job. And then a pathway from that seat up. Right. And then we want to offer more as a company than just a good job. And but that takes profitability.
It takes profitability. It takes money. And people make the mistake and say, oh, especially in some Christian circles, money is evil. No, it's not. No. In fact, it's necessary.
Yes.
It's the blood flow that runs through your business and your life. It's not that money's evil. It's the love of money that's the root of all kinds of evils.
Right.
By the way, anything you make your idol can lead you down dark roads, period. It could be chocolate. Hey, look, I love chocolate.
Hey, I'm sitting right here, Nate.
I mean, come on. I take people to Hershey, Pennsylvania. I'm like, let's eat some chocolate.
Still a little salty we missed that trip.
Right? Yeah, exactly. Like I still have PTSD from all the chocolate. You go to Hershey, you're going to get chocolate. That's the key. The key is that we want to be financially healthy. Why? Because that gives us a resource that we can use to build up all of the blessings that we have. By the way, that's the whole parable of the talents, right? The one person took what they had received money-wise, buried it because they were afraid, right? They didn't. By the way, not only that, they didn't trust. That's the big thing. They didn't trust that they could multiply and increase what they were entrusted with, so that they just were sloth and lazy. Like, you don't want to be that person.
Right.
The other two multiplied and increased what they were entrusted with. This is the whole story that Jesus tells about this process for us, this model. And by the way, the two who multiplied and increased what they were entrusted with, even though the amounts were different, they received the same reward. Come and dine with your master. The other one's like, look, and by the way, good and faithful, wicked and lazy. Like, that was the terminology for the two different types of servants. They're all servants, but wicked. I don't want to be a wicked and lazy servant. I want to be a good and faithful. I want to use the time, talents, and treasures I've been entrusted with to multiply and increase. By the way, I'm not responsible for the quantity. I'm responsible for the quality.
Right.
Let the quantity be multiplied and increased according to God's riches, right? I'll leave that to God. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not gonna not measure it.
Right.
At the same time, my focus is the quality of all the giftings I've been giving and maximizing them for His purpose.
Amen. That's exactly it. I think of the story of Jesus walking down the road, and the beggar sitting off to the side. And, the way that story is described is, Jesus is surrounded by people. It's pretty popular at this point, right? And he's making his way, and the beggar cries out and cries out Jesus, and Jesus stops the crowd and parts the people and walks over to him and says, stand up, dust yourself off, and ask me what you want, right? And because I've gone through this process too, part of my personal struggle, my wife has been a witness to this, is when I fall into the self-limiting beliefs or the trash talk sometimes that can be awfully strong, is feeling like I don't deserve something. And the deserve versus not deserve thing, that's a theological conversation, because we don't deserve anything. Right. However, the grace of God is this. But Jesus said, stand up, dust yourself off, and ask what is it that you ask for, which he doesn't deserve. And he says, I just want to be healed. And Jesus heals him. And I've thought about that a lot, because, the why behind what we're doing. I'm not so interested in, I know the word legacy. To me, that's a word that I've grappled with. I think I had a dream with my kids in the beginning that they all be a part of the business and we take this thing on, and my son would take it and run with it. But I had a hard time communicating with my son how to do it. It's not his fault. We were having a hard time connecting on that. And so when that didn't work out, we had to sort of mourn the loss of the dream we had. That initial dream was, wouldn't it be great if all my kids and their spouses help this thing become a thing. But that was really more ego.
Yeah.
That really wasn't.
That was your dream.
That was
Yeah,
my dream.
right.
It wasn't their dream. You can't make them have your dream.
Right.
Provide an opportunity, but they're watching us labor through growing a company, and they're like, I don't know if I'm so inspired to do this either, which I totally understand.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
They're seeing us, slowly getting there and whatever. And so I understand why my kids are like, yeah, I think we'll do something else at some level, but the door's always open to them. But so legacy for me is not that my name's attached to it, that anybody knows who I am, in 20 years or 50 years, if this company still exists. But the why is, if we can love and serve and be transform our community through reaching out. If 3 young men come into our company and we can help them improve their lives, I'm celebrating.
Yep.
Right? If we can write a check for sex trafficking and rescue, then I'm celebrating. So
Legacy, and I'm glad you brought that up. Legacy isn't about transferring wealth. It's not about people remembering your name
Right.
100 years, 200 years, 300 years, unless
Doesn't matter.
Unless you do something that's massively societally valuable, either whether it's something on the effective or ineffective side, right? You likely you won't be remembered to history. However, and the same thing about family businesses. Even for years, I always told my son, look, like, this business is not for you. It's if you decide that it's something that you want to pursue, we'll kick the can down the road. But I don't want to pressure you.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to pressure you with taking over the family business, because you may be called to do something completely different.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, he took offense to that. Side note, he's like, well, Dad, you don't want me in your business? Like, I mean, truth, not unless you're called to it.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
That's, that's it. And so and then he would say, well, Salah Financial Corp, we don't want to lose the name or sell the business. I'm like, it's just a name.
It's paperwork.
It's just a paper. Yeah. It's
a spreadsheet.
Yeah. Here's legacy. Legacy is obedience.
And
legacy is obedience to love radically, love purposefully. That's the legacy. And guess why? Because your name is written in heaven, rather written there than in any history book.
That's right.
Any day. That's where legacy is made.
our 2 oldest kids are now married, and we have a grandbaby and one coming in a month. And it's great because in their 20s now that they've moved out and started their lives and stuff, they'll call up and say, hey, thanks for the way you raised us. And I'm like, see, don't ask them when they're 17. Wait till they move out, have a kid, but and we see that. We see the fruits of how we raised them, because they're marrying well, and they're having babies, and those things don't make it or break it, but it's we're so happy because they also live close by, so we get to see the grandbabies almost every day.
And they want us in their lives.
And they want us.
Isn't that the best compliment?
Yeah. Our
When your
daughters call up
kids-
my wife and go,
yes.
would you go out to us for coffee? And
Yeah.
my wife's like, I go, see?
My daughter just called and she said, can you meet me at Costco when you're done with your call? I'm like, okay. Well, she has the baby. Yes. I'd love to see both of them. It's a rich life.
Yeah. And that's where legacy manifests itself in a meaningful way.
And we're seeing that because as the door closes on being parents of children at home, that if possible, now God may take them somewhere, but right now,
No, he's not.
we
Been praying against that for
all right, children, listen to your mother. Listen to your mother, children.
Make sure you play this end as part of the podcast
Right.
for them.
But for now, we're enjoying that. We all go to the same church. We get together regularly because we all live close together. And my kids have married wonderful, godly young people, which is really, in the end, if they're going to get married, is that anything else really matter?
It's back to environment.
Right. And our kids have married wonderful young people, and we know their families. So the community just gets richer as we grow older. And if the business is a multi-million-dollar company when we die, and then it gets sold off and they split the money, it's all a spreadsheet. It doesn't really matter. But what we do with it while we're alive is part of the why. And I always encourage young men who think about a business, I always say, why do you want to start a business? And if they say to me they want more time and money, I'm like, well, that's the wrong reason. Eventually that might be the case, but, to understand that arc is a lot slower than a career, but and I can share all that just from the scars that we do have.
Yeah. And those scars are part of the character building that we're all called to. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you for having us.
It's been good. We'll have to do it again because I know there's so much more to share as you continue to define and redefine how God continues to use you, not only in your family, your business, and your community.
Well, Nate, we appreciate you too. You've been a great mentor to us, actually, and Hamilton and in the mastermind group. So this is a privilege. Thank you for what you do.
And having this group, it's not even like we're in each other's lives on a daily basis, right? But I feel so supported and encouraged. And to have people who I respect as individuals and also as business owners look at you, and I'll say it again because I think I've told you before, but having at the last January retreat when you all said you need to be the CEO, and I thought I don't even know what that means. I mean, I have a business degree. I don't know what that means. And Travis sat next to me at the pool, and he looked at me and he goes, you can do this. And so I would encourage anyone to surround yourself with those people that aren't blowing smoke, but that have the knowledge, wisdom, experience, that are willing to pour into you, encourage you, and call you on the carpet when you're not on the right track.
Well said. That's a good place to stop.
Yeah.
Thanks again for being here.
Thank you.